Thank you very much. I'm going to ask my guests, Elie Klimis and Manu Decarpentrie, to join me on stage to start this conversation with you about the movie. Thank you. Have a seat.
Thank you.
So, it's been quite an adventure, I guess, but before we start talking about the movie, I'd like to know a bit more about you. Where do you come from, and when did you decide that you wanted to work in the movies, and why animation? So I want to know everything, actually.
I've always been drawing ever since I was a little kid, and I was in age to hold a pen in my little hand. So I've always been drawing. I've always enjoying movies, animation, stories. So it was the best of both worlds, I guess. And when I learned I could study animation here in Brussels at La Cambre, well, I went for it, and the rest is history.
And you, Manu?
It's a bit of a special story because my background is engineering, computer, IT engineering. I've been working a few years for one of the largest companies in the world, most powerful, and so forth. And I decided to completely change once I fell by chance on a piece of software I was not supposed to watch, which was intending to establish a global surveillance system, 1984, something like that. And I did not agree with it, and so I decided to follow my heart. And that led me exactly here today. I think that's one of the key value I cherish, is to always feel like you are proud of what you are doing and that you are helping mankind and not being part of the problem, as I say.
And were you drawing before? Was it some kind of interest for you, or?
Well, you probably don't know yet what compositing is all about, but you don't really need to be a good drawer, which is a good thing because I'm awful at drawing. But you need to understand what makes a good picture, and you need to understand the tools. Unfortunately, some of those tools were looking very familiar to me because they were using some lines of code and things I was already familiar with. So, yeah.
And how did you change paths in your career? I mean, did you go from one company to another? Did you do more studies, or?
It's an adventure, basically. Once you decide, I don't want to do that career. I didn't really know what tomorrow would bring. I would perhaps sleep under a bridge or something. But generally speaking, life has been relatively kind with me, and I started working first as a teacher in a school that is teaching movie students, and I started teaching about things I knew very well. And then from there on, I started working for one of the major French-speaking television network, public television network here in Brussels. I did a few documentary work and TV reportage and so forth. And I started to enjoy storytelling, and I started to dig into the processing of images and color grading and all the post-production process. And that's how I finally ended up at walking the dog, and that's it.
So could you maybe tell us a bit about compositing, which I don't seem to understand very well because I don't know anything about animation, but could you please tell us in a few words, how would you describe your job?
Yeah, the compositing is a very interesting job that actually existed since the very beginning of animation, in my opinion. It's just that nowadays with the computers, things are getting a little bit different. Some things are way faster to do today than they used to be in the very beginning of the animation, like the Disney studios and so forth. But basically, compositing is just the art of assembling layers So you see some person is responsible for drawing a character, another person is responsible for drawing the background, but of course we will not redraw the background on every frame, every picture. So we tend to use some slides with transparency. And today, even though we don't really work with physical slides, we can actually reproduce that very same effect by manipulating computer images. If you ever heard the software Photoshop, it's basically doing that. It's compositing, it's manipulating the image to create some illusions, and yeah, that's what compositing is all about.
Well, I guess it's a bit more complicated than just what I do with Photoshop, but basically manipulating layers. Elie, you're an animator, so you've been drawing.
Yes.
Could you please tell us a bit about your job and how would you describe it?
Well, the best way I can describe the job of an animator is that we are both draughtsmen, where we draw, and we are also actors, but we are not acting in real time with our voices and with our bodies, because we are very shy usually. And we are acting with our drawings in animated times, so 24 frames per second. And this allows us to really get into the character and, well, do what we do best, draw, and express ourselves that way.
So I guess your job comes after his job. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about how, when do you enter the process when you work on a movie, usually?
Well, as an animator, on Anne Frank, I had two jobs, basically. I was an animator, a character animator at Walking the Dog, and then I was contacted by the crew in Tel Aviv to help the animation director, to help him. I should have gone, but COVID happened. And then I was assistant supervisor. But as an animator, we arrive, well, I can very briefly tell the steps of animation. So it starts just like in live action, with an idea, and then with a script. You write, and then you develop that script with treatment, interior, night, etc., how the ideas flow. Then you go into storyboards, and then the images start to form. And this is where we start splitting from the traditional live-action process. We go into animatic, and parallel to that, the art direction is starting to develop as well. Once the story is well thought of, the visual identity needs to be developed. So the art director is going to work parallel to that. But we create out of the storyboard what we call the animatic, which is basically taking the storyboard pictures, put them into a timeline, into a program, so that we already give the skeleton of the movie, the rhythm, because we have to know that each scene, how long the duration of each scene, the rhythm of the movie. We use voice, like temporary voice, witness voices, but we need to have the feel and the rhythm of the movie. Because since it's animation and it's a lot of work, we cannot do like in live action, take one, take two, do it a little bit more like this, do it more like that. No, we have to have all that thought of in advance, and that's what the animatic is for. So once the animatic is done, and the art direction is done, meaning all the visual identity, the character design, the character sheets, because since a lot of people are going to work on the same thing, we need a common reference. So the character is drawn in all these angles. We have expression sheets to see how each character has a certain personality visually, etc. Once we have all that, the crew creates what we call the layout out of the animatic. So it's a scene with an animatic scene and with the first image with the right background and the storyboard image basically put on model in the nice style. And we receive that. We have a brief from the director and the animation director. In this case, it was Yoni Goodman that works with Ari Folman, because I can come back to that. Ari Folman is not an animation guy. He's a live-action director who happened to fall in love with the animation media. And thus he surrounded himself with animator and with Yoni Goodman to develop his animated project. So our main interlocutor was Yoni Goodman, and he briefs us just like he would brief an actor. This is the intention, and he's like this, she's really angry, she's like this, like that. We receive the layout scene and we start drawing, acting, and you have several stages in that animation. So me as an animator, I'm at the beginning of that process. We do what we call a rough. We don't draw all the drawing, the 24 frame per second drawing perfectly immediately. We draw a rough, basically. So I can show you that later or after the making of, but it's a first sketch with to feel the motion, the intention. After that, if it's okay, because we can have retakes, like do it a bit more like this, like that, because at this stage, since it's a simple drawing, it's easy to correct. We go more into detail, we do the rough one, and then the tie-down. It's another team of animators who precise all the elements, secondary, the hair and stuff like that. And then another team come after that who draw the beautiful lines, so that's the cleanup. And another team does the in-between drawings, the in-betweeners. Another team does the color, and once we have all colored in between animation, it goes into comp.
Then goes compositing. Could you please tell us a bit about that?
Well, we are obviously like the kitchen sink. We get everything, good or bad. No, generally speaking, the goal of the compositing stage is to fix the mistakes, of course, but most of the time we didn't work on many mistakes. Actually, you did a good job, a really good one. We did some mistakes. I could see all the mistakes in this movie. It was like a very difficult experience for me to watch the movie and seeing at almost every image all the little things we could improve. But anyway, that's part of the job. If you want to work as a compositing artist, you really have to have a special attention to details. And yeah. You just said that the devil is in the details, but I really believe that it's important. So yes, we don't fix too many mistakes because obviously we didn't have too many mistakes, and when we did, we most of the time just sent the shot back to the origin, so the shot should be fixed, could be fixed by the person who did it. What we did do spend a lot of time on was all the things that were perhaps going to take a little bit too much time and effort for the animators, like of course the diary, Anne Frank's diary. You have the cover. The cover has a texture. It would have been really tedious for an animator to draw that same texture on every picture. So from a very early stage, Yoni and Dror decided that this part of the animation, this part of the movie should be taken care of by the compositing. And so we did develop some tools just to help us do that job relatively fast. It was still time consuming and difficult and painful, but yeah, I guess it made a lot of sense because we could spend more time doing things I mean, you guys who created the pictures, you could spend more time doing things you like, and it makes a lot of sense, yes.
Same with Kitty's freckles, also.
Yes, same idea. The freckles from the character of Anne.
No, we drew them.
But they were.
She's got only 6.
Yeah, that's probably the reason why you decided to pick those up. But Kitty had a lot of freckles on her face, and so that's one of the things we did. We did also take care of a few things, like, you know, the balloon at the end. It should have been moving a little bit, but we didn't really want to do it in CGI, so we did it in the comp. We just animated it slowly like that. There were a lot of little things, like some lights. For instance, when he's lighting his cigarette, the lighter itself emits light and should light a little bit the hands and the face and so forth. We also added, of course, all the atmospheric effects, the snow, even though most of the time you don't really see it, but the rain was very visible in a few shots. You had also some fog effect. Yeah, this is a lot of fun, basically. So
you don't only mix the layers, you add some layers as well, and you create some new layers to maybe blend everything together, or?
To some extent, you could say that. I don't consider we actually create layers. We just enhance the existing layers, but we do not consider ourselves as animators, generally speaking. Even though some members of the compositing team were actually good animators, so it certainly doesn't hurt to have that skill, which I don't.
So now we know that 6 freckles is the maximum number of freckles you can draw frame to frame. That's it. Maybe before we talk further, we could watch the making of, because I guess the audience is going to understand a few things you've been explaining to us. So maybe we could watch the making of now. Here it is.
You could use those characters in your head. Them fight your war somehow.
This young lady here named Kitty is looking for Anne Frank.
Have you seen her? Anne did not write this diary so that you could worship her. What is important,
Get in the truck.
do everything you can to save one single soul from harm. Just one soul.
And we're back. So I think we've seen quite a lot about compositing in the making of, and about the animatics and the different stages of animation. And we've seen a lot of people in the making of. Could you maybe tell us how many people did you need to make this movie, or the part you did of the movies? Was it a big team, and how many people, and how would you describe it?
Compositing team was probably the smallest team. I think for pre-comp we were 3 to 4 persons in total, and for final comp we were a little bit more, around 10 people. So it's not a huge team by any extent.
In animation, it's a bit more difficult because we were a lot. If you take all the departments, but you've seen different supervisors. In animation under Paul that you've seen, we were. It came and went differently, but around 10, but not 10 all the time. And in the other departments, we were 3 rooms full all the time. So you should ask that to the producers for the exact numbers.
Yeah, we can maybe ask him later.
They're there.
In the bar.
Is there any question in the audience? I can see a hand over there. The first one. Bravest one.
Maybe I've seen some 3D effect on the movie. You didn't talk about it. Is it easy to work with it?
So the effects are, of course, related to the compositing department. There were not a lot of CGI. So if by 3D you actually mean computer-generated images. I think there are a few exceptions. Of course, certain camera movements were partially CGI-based. Some the police cars were CGI indeed. But I think Yoni made the right decision by not using CGI for characters, so that keeps the poetry, I think, the visual poetry, which is very important. So I'm not sure I actually answered your question.
Yes, but at which step is it introduced in the process of the?
I think I was not part of making that decision. I think the decision has been made in pre-production already to keep CGI for very, very specific little things, almost details, actually.
Yeah, actually, Ari Folman and Yoni, so his animation director, are not too fond of the CGI media except for these kind of effects. So they thought of all that in advance, and they saw that more as a mean to solve problems that would have been too time-consuming and too difficult, like cars and things like that, indeed. But they wanted to keep most of the animation traditional.
And when does it happen in the process? The CGI, is it before the compositing, or when does it take place in the plans?
It's generally like animation, and if there is contact between the animation and 2D animation and the 3D animation, it's done before. Like the person in the car, we need to have the car animated to put the character in them. So it's generally done just before us.
I think it was your question. Yeah. Is there another question? Yeah, in the front. Oh, just wait for the mic because we can hear you.
How long did you take to finish the movie? When does the movie begin?
For our part, we worked at Walking the Dog like a year and 6 months. But if we talk about from the start of the writing until the end of the movie, it's years. Yeah, how long? Well, I went to Tel Aviv to work on the development of the trailer to find funds, and that was shortly after the Congress, so it was already in 2016. So yeah, it takes years of writing and pre-production and preparation. But from the moment we start the actual animation, it's a bit less than 2 years. But this is usually not that long. That's also because COVID happened in the middle. Generally, it's a year. I mean, the sheer animation process is like a year or around a year, a bit less around that.
I have a last question. Do you organize like open doors which people can see the work of in Walking Dog? Is that Walking
the Dog.
Walking the Dog?
Well, our producer is here and he can answer that question.
If you're vaccinated.
Yeah.
It's okay then.
3 times. 4 times.
Indeed, but we need to have a production going because otherwise it's less interesting. But yeah.
Maybe you can explain that there were many teams in Belgium, in Israel, in Germany, you told me, and each teams were working on the segments from the movie. Maybe you could explain that. How did you work? It's a big international co-production, so...
It's part of the co-production, so each country receives, gives funds, so it receives a part of the work, and the talents needs to be used, so... as for us, since we've already been working with Ari and Yoni on the Congress, they knew us, they trusted us, so they gave us a really big chunk.
So it's a year and a half for you for, I don't know, like 50 minutes of the movie, so I don't know if you time it in minutes, but then you have to add the years working from the other teams on the other part of the movie, so that's quite a very long time if you add all the work from all the teams.
Yeah, but in terms of animation, the sheer animation, all the teams work at the same time. The longest part is the pre-production, the writing, the animating, really getting into the essence of the project and before we can get started, because once we, the animator, and all the other teams and the comp starts rolling, it has to be smooth. We cannot allow ourselves to make too many mistakes or really redone, because it costs a lot of money. And of course it still happens, but we try to do our best to avoid that. Hence all the work beforehand.
Is there another question? Over there.
I have 2 questions. Like, are you doing editing, or are you just animating at the frame, not one more, not one less? First question. And second one, did you use like real shooting scene, like real?
Stop motion. That's how we call them. Yeah.
I mean, you mean maybe as a reference, the real scene? To answer your question on both questions, it depends on the movie, but usually we try to do not too much editing. That's what the animatic is for, to give the main rhythm and pace of the country. But of course, you can still have handles, as we call them, to cut one frame, another frame, to adjust a little bit. And sometimes we lose a bit of animation, but it has to be minimal. But it depends on the movie. Certain movies are really more precise in that aspect, and others are a bit more free. The movie I'm working on right now is a bit more free, and they still manage to make it work like that. But in general, we try to be as precise as possible beforehand. So the editing, as you call it, is taken care of largely during the animatic phase. And for, I don't know, the live action scenes, if you talk about references, I don't know if that was your question, that depends on the movie. Here on Anne Frank, we didn't have any. Sometimes when we were having trouble with certain angles, we asked each other to pose for each other, or we shot each other, doing the action, because certain angles were really complicated with hands and stuff, to help us understand the motion in the perspective a bit better. But for example, on the Congress, which was with Robin Wright playing Robin Wright, and we had to animate Robin Wright, they had shot all her scenes so that we could have her, and so that we could have a reference, because it was not an imaginary character. We had to animate her, and she had to be recognizable, and we had to copy her expressions and antics, so we had that as a reference to get more into character. But in Anne Frank, we were, and this is rare, generally we don't use that all through. It was particular to the Congress.
If I may add, that some of the scenes were using actually stop motion animation in Anne Frank, like for instance the scene that is happening inside the radio with all the tubes and so forth. That was stop motion. So we tend to use that as well. But the editing, as Elie said, has to be done as early as possible to avoid extra unnecessary costs, basically.
Is there another question? I have a question. In the making of, the animator says that it's, once you've done Anne Frank, you can do any movie later, because it was seems to have been very difficult. What was the greatest challenge for you on this movie? What was the most difficult thing to achieve, and how did you manage?
Well, we manage because we always do, because we're hard workers, and if we don't manage the first time, we try again and try again. What was challenging was the level of excellency they wanted. In the production, they were very particular about that. There was a sort of tension. I think there was high stakes for them, and so they were very stressed about it all. And so they were really, really, really focused and really nitpicking, and we had to be really precise, and it was a huge step in difficulty level, let us say, compared to the Congress. Maybe if you see both movies, you wouldn't notice, but actually in Congress we were a bit more free, a bit more smooth, and here it was every step were really scrutinized to have the best, and to be constantly under that scrutinization, and that you have to be bring your A game 200% of the time. Yeah, sometimes it was a bit difficult, and given that the COVID came in the middle of it to slow us down, it made it all the more difficult. But at the end of the day, it was worth it.
For the compositing department, the biggest challenge was by far the freckles. The Kitty's freckles were really time-consuming.
Too many freckles.
Yeah, we had to develop some scripts, and even with the scripts, we could only achieve like 80 to 90%. So we were getting a lot of retakes. Retake is basically when we send a shot, we believe that it's ready and it's good enough, but it is getting back because it's not approved by a drawer in the case of the compositing department. But COVID was obviously a challenge, but fortunately for this production, most of the work was done on computers, and so people could work from home, which was not possible for the other movie shootings, especially in Belgium. So I always feel a bit sad for my colleagues that are working not in the animation. Yeah, hopefully this is going to be passed very soon. I hope so.
And then I guess there was stress and a responsibility because Anne Frank kind of belongs to everyone, and there must be very high expectations about how she's gonna become an animation character. So I guess did you feel this responsibility to create such an symbolic and emblematic character?
I think us, or I speak for myself, no, because we receive it quite candidly. We take it as it is, and we embrace it. So it's like, yeah, let's go for it. I think that stress was more felt by Yoni, by Ari, and of course then they communicated to us. But at first, no, we embraced it like any other project. Like, let's go for it.
Yeah, and me, I would say that. The more I was working on the movie, the more I got into Anne's story. And of course, I read Anne's diary when I was young, but I don't know, maybe I'm getting more sensitive with the age, but it helped me wonder about a lot of things and how we treat each other. And that's what I like the most about this movie, is that it kind of reflects the value I have in my heart. So, yeah.
Is there another question? I have another one. What did you prefer technically in the movie? What did you prefer doing? What was the most exciting part to do in this movie in particular?
It's a tricky question to answer, because honestly there were a lot of very different challenges, and there were days I was really pissed with those freckles. I just wanted this freckles nightmare to be over. But overall it was interesting, even with those tricky parts. Some of the shots were really extremely poetry, visual poetry, almost like. So no, it would be really hard for me to select just one scene or one sequence. I just loved all of them.
Well, for me, it's a bit hard to answer, but I maybe have two. Like, one of the most challenging was I animated the last scene, so the last kiss between Kitty, and then I needed to be subtle and nice, and I think it was okay. But then the last part when Kitty is away, he only wanted to correct it, so he did it himself. But it was the last one and the last thing I worked on that movie, and it was maybe the most challenging for me. And as for the nicest piece to work on, it was the fanfare fantasy with all the people, because it was like like a gift for all of us, between all the scenes that sometimes were heavy, we had this shot. And it was before COVID, so we all worked together, and we were all worked together. It was the only moment we were all worked together on the same shot at the same sequence at the same time. So we were sharing, like, hey, you did that, and then we were seeing. It was very, very fun to do, because it was really teamwork. That's what I wanted to say about animation. It's always a teamwork, but it's also important and nice to work together in-house. That's why COVID was damaging for us, because we share the things, we help each other, and even the supervisor, he corrects us, like, act it a bit more like that. It's an immediate dialogue. It has to be fast. It's with the body language. It has a lot to do with the body language, and there is nothing more direct with the body language than talking face to face. Once you put a distance, like in remotes, with emails or Zoom, you lose something. So that's why also it was more difficult and slower.
I have a last question, but maybe someone wants to ask something before. Yeah, you can see.
So 2 questions. First for the compositing artist, because I also work in compositing, so I know exactly everything you said. I know exactly what you're talking about, all the pain, all the struggle. First, can you still look at people with freckles without having wanted to run or to throw up? And second, I guess this is more for an editing point of view, but when you were animating or even when you were composing, do you actually work with the music already baked in the sequence, or is it like really afterwards?
I can answer that. We don't even listen to the music or the soundtrack up until the very end when we discover the movie. So perhaps it was possible, but it's not necessary for what we are doing. We are just working on images. And as for your first question, yeah, no problem. I actually find the Kitty's freckles still not 100% perfect. So I keep dreaming about freckles.
I think we'll all dream about Kitty's freckles now. Someone else? Okay, so I have a last question for you. What advice would you give a young artist in the audience who would like to enter the animation game and try to do a career in it?
Well, several things. If you want to be an animator and really work in animation, that's the thing. First, you have to persevere and never give up, because brace yourself, it's hard work, and you shouldn't be easily discouraged, because it's on and on and on and on and on and on. So if you feel like it, go for it, but give it all, because there is no half measures. But it's rewarding, so go for it. Now I can also talk about people who don't want to work in animation, but who want to work with animation. If I take Ari as an example, because if there are some students here studying movie making, but you could do an animated movie. You just need to surround yourself with animators, with us. But it is a media that is open for anyone. If you want to tell a story, you could tell it as an animated story. If you know nothing about animation, you just hire a team of animators. But it is still open to you. So go for it. Because at the end of the day, to finish with that animation thing, I think I talked with Ari about that. So why he chose animation, it's because of he felt he could tell more stories thanks to animation. Because animation is a media that as a paradox, it's that at the same time it puts a distance because it's not reality, but at the same time it brings a closeness through empathy, because with a drawing, through stylization, you can project more and so empathize more. So you can tell more stories and go more in depth about feelings. And that's why Wasu Bashir had such a big success and launched the trend of animated documentary, because it's a way to talk about harsh subjects without getting too much, into the reality that repels people, and without being too fake, but getting really in depth. So yeah, animation is for everyone.
And for me, I would say if you are a computer geek or nerd and you don't feel like you are having any perspective into an artistic position, please change your mind. There are a lot of opportunities, especially in the compositing department. So if you know a little bit of scripting, if you know how to use computers, and if you are very familiar with the file systems and so forth, yeah, you're welcome. We need people like you. And also, of course, don't restrict yourself to one software. The software which was used for this production here came from the Adobe suite, so it's basically very close to Photoshop. It's very unusual to use that particular software for compositing in the industry. So there are other options which are more widely used in the industry, but perhaps a little bit more complex to learn. But that's what I would encourage everybody to learn. So I know that it's much easier to learn After Effects because you have all those nice tutorials on YouTube and so forth. But After Effects is very limited for compositing work. So, yeah.
Be curious.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, just before we wrap it up, I just want to say that the movie was released yesterday in Belgium. So if you like it, do not hesitate to talk about it to your friends and family. And word of mouth is very important for the movie to have a very nice lives in the theaters. So just talk about it. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. And we'll see you in a month for the next masterclass. Thank you.